stories. So as a reminder, I'm Joel Cox, one of the elders here at Trinity Chapel on the shepherding team, and I'm really excited to be here. Really excited to share today in this series of Surrounded as we've been going through Hebrews 11 on Rahab the prostitute. One, because I get to talk about a prostitute in church, which is always fun. But second, because as I've studied, as I've prayed through this, as I've really sought God over the last few weeks on Rahab, she's become one of my favorite people in the Bible. Her story is really amazing, and what God shows us through her is really amazing. So let's jump in. Rahab's story of faith in Hebrews 11 is found in verses 30 and 31, where it says, "By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies." So I kind of want to set the scene, remind us of the story of Rahab. Rahab's story is found in the first several chapters of Joshua. And actually before that, found in the first several chapters of Joshua, she lives in a city called Jericho. Jericho was a worst of the worst kind of city. Pagan worship, they buried live babies as sacrifices, complete rejection of God and everything that he stands for. Maybe most importantly, Jericho is in the land that God promised to the nation of Israel as far back as Abraham. So with Abraham, God made a covenant, and he said, "I'm going to give you this land." But then Israel ends up enslaved by the Egyptians. But God frees the nation of Israel from the Egyptians through Moses. And he makes a covenant with Moses, and he says, "I'm going to give you this land." And God gets Moses and the nation of Israel right up to the cusp of the promised land. But the nation of Israel looks into the land, and they see the armies that are there, they see the cities that are there, and they doubt. And they say, "We can't take on those people. We don't think that God can do this." And so God sends them away from the promised land. And he sends them to wander in the wilderness for almost 40 years, and Moses dies. And now God appoints Joshua to lead the nation of Israel. And that starts us off in the book of Joshua. And God makes a covenant with Joshua and says, "Okay, now's the time. We are going into the promised land, and the first stop is Jericho. We're going for Jericho." And so Joshua calls the people together, and he says, "Okay, we're doing it this time. We're entering the promised land. So I need 2 spies. I need 2 spies to go into the city and to scout it out. Figure out what their weaknesses are. How can we get in? What's the best plan of attack? How big is their army? Help me formulate a strategy." So the 2 spies go into Jericho, and they meet Rahab, this prostitute. And almost immediately, the spies are recognized for being from Israel. I don't know if they've got the Team Israel jersey on or whatever it is, but they're immediately recognized. And they've heard of Israel. They've heard about this nation that was enslaved and freed by this God. And so they go and report to the king and say, "King, there's 2 guys from Israel here, and they're scouting out our land." So the king sends his men to Rahab's house to go get these spies. And he bangs on the door. And they say, "Rahab, where are the spies? I know they're here. I know those guys from Israel are here." And she's like, "Whoa. First of all, drop the tude. Second of all, they were here, but they're not here anymore." I think they went that way. Meanwhile, Rahab has hidden the spies on her roof. And it says in Joshua 2, verse 8, "Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, 'I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath." And then Rahab makes a request of the spies. She says, "Since I've been kind to you, since I've shown love to you in hiding you, will you save me? When you come to Jericho to attack Jericho, will you save me, but not only me, also my family?" will you save my father, my mother, my brothers, my sisters, and all of their kids? And the spies agree. They say, okay, when we come back, if you don't tell anyone about us, then we will save you and your family. So Rahab lets the spies down. Her house is kind of built into the city wall. She has a window. She lets a red scarlet cord down out through the window, and the spies escape through the window. And the spies say, tie this cord to your window, and that's how we'll know which house is yours when we come and attack, and we will save you. So the spies go back to camp to report to Joshua all the weaknesses that they found in the Jericho city. And sometimes I think about like how these conversations might go. And so Joshua is saying, okay, like he's got his map out of the city of Jericho, and how big is their army? Where's the weaknesses? And the spies are like, see, what had happened was we ran into this prostitute. And Josh was like, come on. He's like, no, it's not like that. But we didn't actually find out any information. We had to hide the whole time. But this Rahab lady, she's a person of faith. We're going to save her. But yeah, we don't actually have any news for you. But God comes to Joshua, and God says, I had this the whole time. I have the plan. I just need you to be faithful in that plan and obey. You will cross the Jordan. You will approach Jericho, and you will march around the city once a day for 6 days. And on the 7th day, you will march around the city 7 times. And on the last time, you will blow your trumpets, and you will shout, and I will hand Jericho over to you. And unlike many opportunities before, Israel actually follows through in faith. They obey. They come to the Jordan. God parts the Jordan. We hear a lot about God parting the Red Sea. He does it again. He parts the Jordan so that the nation of Israel can walk through. Israel marches around the city for 6 days, and on the 7th day, they blow their trumpets, they shout, and the walls start to shake. And God levels the walls. And the nation of Israel rushes in, and in Joshua 6 we read, and they burned the city with fire and everything in it. For Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers from Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So that's the scene. And where I want to go is I want to talk about God's pursuit. I want to talk about Rahab's response. And then I want to talk about God's extravagant love. But before I get to those points, I think it's worth thinking about this Rahab the prostitute. It's interesting, like no one else that I can think of, almost every time you see Rahab's name in the Bible, it's Rahab the prostitute. She has this tag. And I just started thinking about that, and what must her life have been like? And I think about, I think in the context where I've known of prostitutes, I don't know how to get there. But so in college, I went on this mission trip with some friends to start this sports camp in the 5th Ward of Houston. And the 5th Ward of Houston is this extraordinarily poor, gang-ridden part of Houston. And we met with this pastor who had a church there. And he was kind of setting the scene for us for what we were walking into. And one of the things he brought up was that a lot of the kids' moms that we would be meeting were prostitutes. At that time, they were currently prostitutes. And he explained that it wasn't a proud thing. It wasn't something they were happy about. It was, to them, in their view, it was their only chance. There's not a lot of employment in the 5th Ward of Houston. The dads aren't around. They have to get food on the table. They want to be home with the kids. They saw this as their only chance. And it was disgraceful, and it was shameful. It was dehumanizing. But they did it. I read about Cambodia. Sex trafficking is rampant in the country of Cambodia. What happens is most people live off of fishing. So they have these nets, and they throw them out, and they get these fish. And inevitably, the nets get holes in them. They get broken, and there's people who will come, and they'll mend the nets. And most of them are well-meaning, but some of them are not. And they always have to sign something that says, yes, you're fixing my nets, and I'm going to pay you this. A lot of the people aren't educated. They can't read. And so there are men who will come and say, I'm offering to fix your nets, and they'll have them sign the thing. And unbeknownst to the people, they are actually signing something that puts them in an extraordinary amount of debt to the person who's going to fix the nets. And the person knows full well that his family is never going to be able to repay that debt. And then they threaten them with the debt. They put pressure on them. And then they say, well, I see you have a daughter. And I have work. So if you will give me your daughter to come work, then I'll forgive your debt. And maybe knowing, but probably not knowing what they're doing, they agreed to that because of the threat that's being put on their family if they don't do this. And then these girls grow up in this life, this terrible, terrible, terrible life where they're suffering and they're broken and they're dehumanized and they're just a terrible life. So we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us how Rahab got into this life of prostitution. And it's certainly possible that she was an entrepreneurial woman and she ran the numbers and she looked at her options and she said, I could make the most money this way, so I'm going to do that. It's possible. I kind of doubt it. It's more likely to me that she's full of suffering, that she's full of shame. Certainly the sin is still there, and that's a big part of this story, her sinfulness. But she's outcast. She's used. She's certainly abused. She's dehumanized. She's downtrodden. She has a complete loss of self-worth. And I'm going to touch more, as we go through the points, I'm going to touch more on why I think that might be the case, that she has that kind of story. But I think as we start, it's worth thinking about her life and how she may have gotten there. So, back to the story. What is this story of Rahab even doing here? Why is God telling this story now? This is Israel's big day. This is the people of God, after so many times of doubting God, are finally following through, being obedient. And finally, this is God's chosen people for the first time, after being told about for hundreds of years. This is the nation of Israel for the first time setting foot in the land promised to them for generations. This is a banner day for the nation of Israel. This is an opportunity for God to be saying, see, I told you guys I was going to give you that land. I told all of you that I was going to give these people that land. I told you. This is a perfect opportunity for God to shine the spotlight on his chosen people. But instead, there's this story about this prostitute in this pagan, God-rejecting city. Why stop down the triumphal entry of the nation of Israel to tell this story of Rahab? Let's remember who Israel was. Israel was the smallest people group. They were nothing to look at. They weren't the Vegas odds-on favorite for anything. They were enslaved. They were oppressed. They were downtrodden. They were rejected. They were a nothing of a people. And God chose them. God made a covenant with them. God saved them. And now the generations-long promise is finally coming to fruition. Time for Israel to be on the pedestal. And God interrupts it, and he highlights this downtrodden, rejected, used and abused, nothing of a woman. He seeks her out. He pursues her. Joshua sent those spies on an intel mission to go figure out what the weaknesses were. They found out nothing, and God had the plan the whole time. God's purpose for sending those spies into enemy territory was to get Rahab. He was on pursuit. He was there to get Rahab. God had the plan the whole time, and I think it's a reminder to Israel why he tells this story now. Why it's a reminder to Israel, it's a reminder to us that it's not about Israel. It's about God's pursuit of anyone and everyone that will show faith in him. And he's got a special place in his heart for the Israels of the world, for the Rahabs of the world, the downtrodden, the suffering, the outcasts. And 2, it shows us that there's no sin that his grace won't cover. We cannot out-sin his grace. There are people here, I have friends who really, really struggle with the idea that God's grace could extend to them. They get the idea of God's grace. They get the idea of his love. They just say, there's just no way it applies to me. It's just not, it's great, and God's great for doing what he does. It's just not for me. And Rahab shows us that there's no out-sinning his grace. And in fact, if anything, he delights in picking out who we would call the worst of sinners and showing his glory and his love and his grace through them. If anything, God loves the underdog. Rahab's a great example of God's grace. So God pursues Rahab, and Rahab responds in faith. In the book of James, which we studied a while back, James actually uses Rahab as an example of the faith that he's talking about. He uses her right alongside Abraham. In the book of James, he is addressing people who are giving lip service to God, who are saying, this God, he's great, he exists, totally like that guy. He's great. But they're not exhibiting any love toward God, any love toward people. And James tells those people, you believe that God is one? You do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. And then he uses Rahab's confession, where she says, for the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. And her subsequent act of love toward the spies and hiding them and protecting them as examples of true faith. And it's a great example, because just like the demons see God and shudder, Rahab tells us that the whole city of Jericho is terrified. She's not the only one hearing these stories. She's not the only one that's heard of this God. She's not the only one who's heard about God saving these people and that he's conquering these cities on the way to Jericho. She's not the only one. The whole city has heard. And she says the whole city, every man has melted away in fear. They're all terrified, but none of them trust God. Ultimately, they're all still trusting their city walls, their army, their gods, ultimately themselves to save them. Only Rahab places her life in the hands of God and in the hands of his people and shows love to them. Only Rahab trusts God. And going back to her life, and why I think it might be the case that she's this suffering sinner, this broken, downtrodden sinner, I think maybe it's precisely because of that she's the one that sees God for who he is. She's seeing and experiencing firsthand the depth of the depravity of the ways of this city, of living separate from God, of living on your own terms, of worshiping other gods, of thinking there are other things that can keep them safe. She's experiencing the end result, the death of that life. She's seeing it. She knows the end of that story. And then she hears about this God who chooses a nation of slaves, saves them, performs miracles for them, a nation of nobodies, a nation of downtrodden, enslaved people. And she says, that's a God that I'll trust my life to. That's a God that I'll follow. And that's a God whose people I will show love to. Rahab is our reminder to examine our lives, to look at the world around us and look at how we are choosing our culture, our comforts, our safeties, ourselves over God. To examine where we are placing more faith in this life than that life, than life with God. And Rahab stands as an example. In Hebrews 11, it's this analogy of this race. We're we're on this race, and Rahab is standing there as we're confronted with culture, and we're confronted with money, and we're confronted with all these things, and she's saying, you can stand apart from that, and there's great life there. She's our reminder that standing apart, swimming upstream is worth it. And God does save her. God pursues Rahab. She responds in faith. Israel crosses the Jordan. Israel marches around the city once a day for 6 days. On the seventh day, they march around 7 times. They blow their trumpets. They shout. The walls start shaking. And God brings the walls down. And in Joshua 6, as we read before, it says, and they burned the city with fire and everything in it. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And the credits roll. And the music plays. And it's an amazing ending, right? We see the burning city of Jericho in the distance. The camera's panned out. The rubble of the wall in front. And we see 3 figures emerge on top of the wall of the city wall. And we realize it's the 2 spies and it's Rahab. And Rahab descends the rubble of the city wall. The city's burning, the sun's setting behind them. And then the spies stop at the top of the rubble, and it zooms in, and we see Rahab's mom climb up over the wall. And we see Rahab's dad. And we see Rahab's sister. And we see Rahab's brother. And we see all the nieces and nephews of Rahab. Even little Joel, who's been providing comic relief throughout the whole movie. He's awesome. We love that kid. And we're crying, and it's this amazing story of God's pursuit and love for the rejected, and how his grace is unmatched, and how this suffering prostitute found faith in God, and he plucked her out just before the destruction of the city of Jericho. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. But it's not the end of the story. Matthew 1:1 starts, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And it starts tracing the family line from Abraham on down. It goes through a few generations, and in verse 5, we read, and Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of David the king. And then it continues on for another 10 verses, several more generations, and it says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Rahab shows up in the family line of Jesus. There are only 5 women named in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Extraordinarily rare, by the way, for any woman to be named in any genealogy of anyone, much less when you're trying to legitimize the family line of the Savior of the universe. But there she is, Rahab. God invited her into the family and lists her proudly as an ancestor of his son, Jesus Christ. This is astounding, scandalous, amazing grace, extravagant love. The credits were rolling. The music was playing. We already learned. We already saw the inspiring story of God's love and grace and Rahab's faith. This isn't necessary. He didn't need to do this. It's just an exhibition of God's extravagant love for Rahab. That's my only explanation for why he puts her there. He's already saved. We've already learned about God's pursuit of the downtrodden. For God to then say, no, that's not all. I want you in the family. I want you in the family of Jesus Christ. That's over the top, hard to put words to love. It's extravagant. You know what's even more amazing? That's us. That's you. It seems to me that God could have seen his creation reject him. But he loved us so much that he sends away. And he pursues us into the pagan city, into the city that's rejected him. He pursues us, and he justifies us. And when we trust him, he saves us from eternal separation from himself, from destruction, so that we could be with him for eternity, worshiping and experiencing his glory. And the credits roll. And it's an amazing story. A story of grace and love. And it seems perfectly plausible for the story to end there, and for it to be this event and this reality worthy of eternal worship. And we're saved, and we're in the presence of God. It's amazing if the credits roll right there. But they don't. Galatians 4:4-8 says, "But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God." God adopts us. He invites us into the family. Says, yeah, I've provided a way for you to be reunited with me, to save you from eternal separation from me, from destruction. But here's the thing. I want to be your dad. I want you to be my son. I want you to be my daughter. I want you to be my heir. It's not necessary. He didn't need to do that. It's just this awesome exhibition of God's extravagant love for you. That's more than a judge deciding right and wrong standing with God. That's a God who wants a relationship with you, who says it's not enough to just save you. I want you in the house. I want you living with me. I want to be your dad. I want you to be my child. That's over the top, hard to put words to love, extravagant love. And that's my only explanation for that. And I can't let it sink in enough. I can't sit in that long enough. I can't let that wash over me enough. I can't let the Spirit work that in me enough. Because when I let him, when I think about that love, that's a love that'll send you into Jericho to find the next Rahab. That's a love that turns obedience from a chore into, yes, of course I want that. Of course I want to follow you. If you can love me, if you can see my past, my present, what I think about, what I do, and one, you save me, but then you decide to call me your child when you don't need to, but you choose to. You choose to be my father and to relate to me as a father, to invite me inside the house. Yes, I want you. That's life-changing love. What is the life that you call life to the full? Because I want that. Whatever that is, that's what I want. And yes, if you present a situation to an opportunity to step out in faith, where I don't know what the outcome is going to be, you're calling me to go from here to there, and I don't know how that's going to turn out. You're asking me to send my kids there, and I don't know how that's going to turn out. But in the end, I know that I have you, and you're a God that loves me so much that you not only saved me, but call me your child, then absolutely, I'm in. Point me toward Jericho. It's easy to forget, but when we sit in that, when we really think about the extravagance of that love, it propels us. So I want to invite the band back up. I think I want us to respond. I think it feels right to respond to this, to the fact that God pursues, that He pursues us, and that we can't out-sin His grace, and that it doesn't matter even if you think, no, I'm the worst, and even if you're right, even if you are right that you're the worst of sinners, God loves to pick out who we call the worst of sinners and to save them. He has a heart for the broken. And He asks for a faith that trusts, that doesn't look toward our own safety nets, toward ourselves, but toward Him. And He asks for a love that overflows to other people. And then Rahab is this parallel of us where the story could have ended, and it's awesome. But then we see her in the family of Jesus, and it's amazing, extravagant love. And that applies to you. He invites you into the family. And if we'll sit in that, and if we'll think about that, if I will let myself be in that, that can be a life-changing reality.